Good evening, friends. Tonight we drift back through time to colonial Boston, where the simple act of creating light demanded sweat, skill, and an iron stomach for the stench of boiling fat. We'll discover how ordinary candle makers spent their days dipping wicks into vats of bubbling tallow, their faces glazed with soot and steam, how they transformed whale blubber and beef fat into the precious glow that lit parlors and workshops alike. Simple labors that separated darkness from the gentle flicker of civilization. If slow, story-rich history helps you unwind, feel free to tap like and subscribe, and in the comments, share where you're listening from and what time glows on your clock tonight. I'm always amazed by how this sleepy community stretches across time zones and continents. So, dim your modern lights. Let the hum of your fan replace the crackle of tallow fires, settle deep into your pillow, and allow yourself to drift back to a time when every candle represented hours of patient, grimy work, as we begin our journey together into the waxy world of colonial Boston. Imagine yourself stepping through the narrow doorway of a candle maker's workshop on Fish Street in colonial Boston. The year is 1765, and the morning air carries the salt tang of the harbor mixed with something far less pleasant, the thick, cloying smell of rendering fat that announces your arrival at Thomas Whitmore's chandlery. The workshop sits squeezed between a cooperage and a small tavern, its weathered clapboard walls stained dark with years of greasy smoke. Above the door, a faded sign depicts a single candle flame, though the paint has long since begun to peel, revealing the gray wood beneath. You duck slightly as you enter, for colonial door frames were built for shorter folk, and the low ceiling immediately presses down upon you. The first thing that strikes you is the heat. Even in the cool of an October morning, the workshop radiates warmth from the great iron cauldrons that dominate the center of the room. 3 of them sit atop brick furnaces, each one large enough to hold 40 gallons of melted tallow. The fires beneath them never fully die. They merely slumber through the night, ready to be stoked back to life before dawn. Thomas Whitmore has been awake since 4 in the morning. His day began in darkness, fumbling for his tinderbox, striking flint against steel until a spark caught in the char cloth. From that tiny ember, he coaxed flame to a pine splinter, then to a stub of yesterday's candle, the irony not lost on him that a candle maker must burn his own product simply to see his way to make more. His hands, if you were to examine them closely, tell the story of his trade. The skin is permanently stained a yellowish hue, with deep cracks running across his palms like dried riverbeds. His fingernails are rimmed with black that no amount of scrubbing can remove, and there are countless small burns, some fresh and angry red, others faded to white scars. These are the badges of his profession, earned through years of working with boiling fat and open flames. The tallow itself arrives twice a week from the slaughterhouses near the common. Great barrels of beef fat, still pink with traces of meat and membrane, are rolled through the streets on hand carts. The smell announces their arrival long before they appear, a sweet, sickly odor that makes newcomers to the trade gag and reach for their handkerchiefs. But Thomas barely notices any more. His nose has long since grown accustomed to the stench. The rendering process begins before the sun rises. Each piece of fat must be carefully trimmed of any remaining meat or gristle, for these impurities will cause the candles to sputter and smoke. Thomas uses a sharp knife, worn thin from years of sharpening, cutting the fat into chunks no bigger than a child's fist. His apprentice, young Samuel, aged 14 and 2 years into his 7-year indenture, works alongside him. Though his cuts are less precise, his movements still uncertain. Into the cauldrons the fat goes, handful by handful. The heat slowly transforms the solid chunks into liquid, releasing that distinctive smell that permeates every corner of the workshop, and indeed every fiber of clothing worn within its walls. It's a smell that follows candle makers home, that seeps into their bedding, that causes proper ladies to discreetly hold scented pomanders to their noses when passing them on the street. The rendering takes hours. Throughout this time, the mixture must be stirred constantly with long wooden paddles to prevent scorching. The bottom of the cauldron is the danger zone. If the tallow burns there, the entire batch will carry an acrid smell that makes the candles unsaleable. So Thomas and Samuel take turns, their arms aching from the repetitive motion, sweat dripping from their brows despite the cool autumn air outside. As the fat melts, impurities rise to the surface, bits of tissue, blood vessels, and other unwanted matter that must be skimmed away with a perforated ladle. This scum, as it's called, is set aside in wooden buckets. Nothing is wasted in colonial Boston. Even this foul-smelling refuse will be sold to soap makers, who will transform it through their own alchemy of lye and ash. By mid-morning, the first batch of tallow is ready. It has been strained through loosely woven cloth to remove the last solid pieces, leaving behind a clear, golden liquid that shimmers with heat. But this is only the beginning of the candle maker's day. Now comes the true test of patience and skill, the dipping. Hanging from the ceiling beams are dozens of wooden frames, each holding rows of cotton wicks. These wicks have been carefully prepared, twisted from Turkish cotton when it can be afforded, or from common milkweed fibers when times are lean. Each wick must be perfectly straight, for a crooked wick means a crooked candle, and crooked candles fetch lower prices at market. Samuel's first task each morning is to prepare these wicks. He cuts them to precise lengths using a measuring stick marked with notches, 6 inches for standard table candles, 12 inches for chamber candles, and occasionally, when a wealthy customer places a special order, 18 inches for grand parlor candles. Each wick is tied to a thin wooden rod, spaced exactly 2 fingers apart. The dipping process requires a particular rhythm. Too fast and the layers won't adhere properly, too slow and the tallow cools unevenly, creating lumps and ridges. Thomas demonstrates for Samuel, though the boy has watched this dance 1,000 times. Down into the cauldron, a smooth motion, not too deep or the heat will melt the previous layers. Hold for a count of 3, then up and out, letting the excess drip back. The first dip creates barely a whisper of wax around the wick, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. But Thomas sees it, notes the way the tallow clings, judges whether the temperature is exactly right. Too hot and it won't build properly, too cool and the layers won't meld together. He adjusts the fire, adding a piece of oak here, dampening with ashes there, until the temperature is perfect. Each candle requires between 20 and 40 dips, depending on the desired thickness. Between each dip, the candles must cool. They're hung on rotating frames, turned slowly to ensure even cooling, preventing the tallow from pooling on one side. This cooling takes several minutes, during which Thomas and Samuel prepare the next set of wicks, trim completed candles, or tend to the fire. The mathematics of candle making are relentless. A good chandler can produce perhaps 200 candles in a day, but a household might burn through a dozen in a single evening. The demand never ceases, especially as autumn deepens toward winter and the days grow shorter. Boston's population of nearly 16,000 souls requires thousands of candles each week, and Thomas is one of only 8 chandlers serving the entire town. By noon, the workshop has become almost unbearably hot. The October sun, weak though it may be, combines with the heat from the cauldrons to create a stifling atmosphere. Thomas opens the single window, though this brings its own problems. Flies, drawn by the smell of tallow, swarm in and must be constantly waved away. If they land in the cooling wax, they become entombed, creating flaws that render the candle worthless for sale to discerning customers. The flies are not the only creatures drawn to the workshop. Rats are a constant menace, gnawing through barrels to reach the stored tallow, leaving their droppings among the supplies. Thomas keeps 2 cats, a tabby named Smoke and a black tom called Soot, whose sole job is to patrol the workshop. They've grown fat on their diet of rodents, and their fur carries the same greasy smell as everything else in this place. As the candles accumulate, hanging like pale stalactites from their frames, Thomas begins the next phase of his work, finishing. Each candle must be trimmed to remove the excess wax at the bottom where it was held during dipping. The bottoms must be flattened so they'll stand properly in candlesticks. This is done with a heated iron plate, pressing each candle base against it just long enough to melt it smooth. The quality control is exacting. Thomas examines each candle, running his fingers along its length, feeling for imperfections. A bubble in the wax will cause sputtering. An off-center wick means an uneven burn. A yellowish tinge indicates impure tallow that will smoke. These imperfect candles are set aside, to be melted down and begun again, or sold at reduced prices to those who cannot afford better. The colonial economy runs on reputation and word of mouth. One batch of bad candles, one too many complaints from housewives about smoking wicks or quick-burning tapers, and Thomas's business could be ruined. His competitors would be quick to spread word of any failing, particularly John Hancock's chandlery near the wharf, which has the advantage of first pick from incoming shipments of spermaceti. Ah, spermaceti, the holy grail of colonial candle-making. This waxy substance, extracted from the heads of sperm whales, creates candles that burn brighter and longer than any tallow could achieve. They're also odorless, a quality that makes them highly prized among the wealthy. But spermaceti is expensive, controlled by a handful of wealthy merchants who formed what amounts to a monopoly. Thomas can rarely afford to work with it, though he keeps a small supply for special orders. The afternoon brings a different sort of labor. With enough candles completed to fill several orders, Thomas must prepare for delivery and sale. The candles are carefully wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and loaded into a wooden handcart. Each bundle is marked with the customer's name and the number of dozen within. Mrs. Worthington has ordered 4 dozen for her upcoming soiree. Reverend Mathis needs 2 dozen for the meeting house. The Copper Kettle Tavern requires 6 dozen of the cheaper variety. But before deliveries can be made, there's the matter of the shop front. Though most of Thomas's business comes from regular customers and special orders, he maintains a small retail space at the front of his workshop. Here, candles are displayed by size and quality. The finest beeswax candles, when he can obtain the materials, are kept under glass to protect them from dust and fingers. The everyday tallow candles stand in neat rows, sorted by length. Young Samuel tends the shop when customers arrive, though he must frequently call Thomas from the workshop to negotiate prices. A dozen standard candles sell for 2 shillings, though Thomas will accept barter when coin is scarce. He's been known to trade candles for cornmeal, salt pork, or services. Last week, he exchanged 3 dozen candles for the cobbler's promise to resole his boots. The colonial monetary system adds another layer of complexity to the chandler's life. Spanish pieces of 8 circulate alongside British pounds. Massachusetts paper money trades at a discount, and many transactions still occur through book credit, with debts recorded in ledgers and settled quarterly. Thomas keeps meticulous records in his account book, noting each transaction in his cramped handwriting. The delivery rounds begin in late afternoon, when the sun slants low across Boston's narrow streets. Thomas loads his handcart carefully, balancing the weight to prevent tipping on the cobblestones. The streets themselves are a trial. October rains have turned many of them to mud, and the wooden wheels of his cart sink deep into the mire. Horse droppings add to the muck, creating a foul-smelling obstacle course. His first stop is the Worthington House on Beacon Hill. Here, the streets are slightly better maintained, the houses grander, with glass windows instead of oiled paper. Mrs. Worthington's servant meets him at the back door. Servants and tradesmen never enter through the front. The candles are inspected carefully, each one examined for flaws before payment is accepted. The social hierarchy of colonial Boston is rigid and unforgiving. Though Thomas is a freeman, a property owner, and a member of the church, he remains firmly in the artisan class. He removes his hat when speaking to gentlemen, steps aside on narrow walkways to let ladies pass, and never presumes familiarity with his social betters. Yet within his own sphere he commands respect. He serves on the night watch, votes in town meetings, and his word carries weight in disputes among the working folk. From Beacon Hill, Thomas descends toward the waterfront, where the Copper Kettle Tavern awaits its delivery. The tavern keeper, a stout Dutchman named Van der Berg, haggles over every penny. He claims the last batch burned too quickly, demands a discount, threatens to take his business elsewhere. Thomas stands firm, knowing that Van der Berg makes these same complaints every month, yet always pays in the end. The tavern itself is already filling with dock workers and sailors, their voices growing louder as the rum flows. Candles here serve a purely functional purpose, providing just enough light for men to see their cards and dice. These candles will be burned carelessly, dripping wax onto scarred wooden tables, their wicks untrimmed until they gutter and smoke. As evening approaches, Thomas makes his final delivery to the meeting house. Reverend Mathis insists on the best quality candles for the church, believing that inferior light dishonors the Lord. The candles for the pulpit must be especially fine, as all eyes will be upon them during Sunday services. Thomas takes particular care with these orders, knowing that the entire congregation will judge his work. The walk back to the workshop as darkness falls presents its own irony. The candlemaker, having spent his entire day creating light, must now navigate dark streets with only the faint glow from windows to guide him. Boston has no street lighting and won't for several more decades. Each householder is supposed to hang a lantern outside their door, but compliance is sporadic. Back at the workshop, the day is far from over. The fires must be banked for the night, but not extinguished. Tomorrow's work will begin again before dawn, and cold furnaces would add hours to the morning routine. The remaining tallow must be covered to protect it from rats and dust. The completed candles must be moved to the storage room, where they'll hang until sold. Samuel, exhausted from his 14-hour day, begins the cleaning. The floors must be swept of tallow drippings before they harden. The paddles and ladles must be scraped clean. The cauldrons, while still warm, must be wiped of any residue that might burn tomorrow. This is apprentice work, tedious and tiring, but necessary for learning the trade. The apprenticeship system defines young Samuel's entire existence. He lives in a small room above the workshop, barely large enough for a straw mattress and a wooden chest for his few possessions. His parents signed him over to Thomas at age 12, and for 7 years he belongs almost entirely to his master. Thomas provides food, clothing, shelter, and training. In exchange, Samuel provides labor from dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. The contract, written in formal legal language and witnessed by a magistrate, specifies Thomas's obligations. He must teach Samuel not only the art of candle making but also basic arithmetic for keeping accounts, and reading sufficient for understanding orders. He must provide sufficient meat, drink, apparel, lodging, and washing fitting for an apprentice. He must also ensure Samuel attends church and maintains moral behavior. But the reality of apprenticeship is often harsher than the contract suggests. Samuel's hands are constantly burned and blistered. His back aches from bending over cauldrons. His clothes reek of tallow despite weekly washing. He hasn't seen his family in 2 years, though they live just across the Charles River in Cambridge. And he won't receive wages until his final year, when Thomas must pay him a journeyman's rate. Yet Samuel is fortunate compared to some. Thomas is a fair master who doesn't beat his apprentices, feeds them the same food his family eats, and genuinely teaches the trade rather than simply using them for labor. Samuel has heard stories from other apprentices of masters who are drunk, violent, or neglectful. One boy he knows ran away 3 times before being caught and having his indenture extended by 2 years as punishment. The evening meal, taken at 7 o'clock, brings the household together. Thomas's wife, Martha, has prepared a simple supper of bread, cheese, and pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and scraps of meat. The family eating arrangements reflect the social order. Thomas and Martha sit at the table with their 3 children. Samuel stands at a high counter along the wall, as befits his station. Martha Whitmore bears her own burdens in this candle-making life. The smell of tallow permeates not just the workshop but the entire house attached to it. Her attempts to mask it with herbs and vinegar are largely futile. She cannot invite the minister's wife for tea, knowing the woman would be appalled by the odor. Her children are sometimes mocked at school as the tallow brats. Yet Martha is essential to the business in ways that go beyond mere tolerance of its inconveniences. She manages the household economy with ruthless efficiency, stretching every penny, mending clothes until they virtually dissolve, preparing meals from the cheapest ingredients. She also maintains the account books when Thomas is illiterate in matters of elaborate bookkeeping, and her neat columns of figures track every farthing earned and spent. After supper, by the light of their own candles, another irony of the trade, Thomas reviews the next day's orders while Martha mends clothing. Samuel is permitted 1 precious hour to practice his letters, copying passages from the Bible onto a slate. The younger children are already abed, exhausted from their own day of chores and dame school. The colonial evening is quiet in ways modern ears can barely comprehend. No machinery hums, no traffic passes, no electric lights buzz. The only sounds are the settling of the fire, the scratch of Samuel's chalk on slate, the whisper of thread through fabric. Occasionally the night watchman calls the hour. 9 o'clock and all is well, his voice carrying clearly through the still air. But all is not always well. Fire is the constant spectre haunting every candle-maker's dreams. With open flames, cauldrons of boiling fat, and wooden buildings pressed close together, the potential for disaster is ever present. Thomas has seen 2 chandleries burn to the ground in his 20 years in the trade, one taking 3 adjacent buildings with it. The fire precautions are numerous but never sufficient. Buckets of sand stand ready throughout the workshop. A barrel of water sits by the door, though it would be nearly useless against a tallow fire, which would simply spread the burning grease. The town requires each householder to maintain leather fire buckets, marked with their initials, to form bucket brigades when the alarm bells ring. Thomas remembers the Great Fire of 1760, when a chandlery on King Street went up in flames. The tallow fed the fire like oil, sending black smoke billowing across the town. The heat was so intense that windows shattered 3 buildings away. 7 structures were lost before the fire brigades could create a fire break by pulling down an 8th with hooks and chains. The chandler lost everything and now works as a laborer at the docks, his dreams of prosperity reduced to ash. Insurance, such as it exists, is prohibitively expensive for most tradesmen. The Hand-in-Hand Fire and Contribution Society offers policies, but the premiums for a chandlery are nearly a month's profit. Most candle makers simply pray, maintain their precautions, and hope that fate and providence spare them. As 10 o'clock approaches, Thomas makes his final rounds of the workshop. Each cauldron is checked, ensuring the fires are properly banked. The windows are shuttered and barred against thieves. The cats are confirmed to be on duty, though Smoke appears to be asleep atop a pile of empty sacks. The door is secured with a heavy oak bar across iron brackets. The night ahead offers little true rest for a chandler. Thomas will wake at least twice to check the workshop, ensuring no stray spark has caught, no rat has knocked over a candle. His sleep, when it comes, is often haunted by dreams of endless dipping, of tallow that won't set properly, of customers refusing his wares. Martha jokes that he counts candles instead of sheep, though there's little humor in the exhaustion that lines both their faces. Before retiring, Thomas reviews tomorrow's challenges in his mind. A shipment of bayberry is expected from Cape Cod, a rare opportunity to make the green-tinted candles that wealthy ladies favor for their parlors. But bayberry is difficult to work with, requiring different temperatures, different techniques. The berries must be boiled for hours to extract their waxy coating, yielding only a pound of wax from 15 pounds of berries. The economics of specialty candles reveal the delicate balance Thomas must maintain. Bayberry candles can sell for 3 times the price of tallow, but the raw materials cost 5 times as much. The labor is doubled, the failure rate higher. Yet refusing such orders means losing customers to competitors who will take the risk. So Thomas accepts, knowing that one ruined batch could erase a month's profits. The seasonal rhythms of candle making follow patterns as old as civilization itself. Autumn, when livestock are slaughtered for winter, brings abundant tallow, but also the challenge of rendering in still warm weather when fat spoils quickly. Winter offers ideal cooling conditions but makes the workshop brutal to work in, fingers so numb they can barely grip the dipping rods. Spring brings the smell of rotting tallow as temperatures rise. Summer is nearly unbearable, the heat from the furnaces combining with sweltering weather to create conditions that test human endurance. Samuel, in his small room above, lies on his thin mattress and flexes his burned fingers. Today he ruins 6 candles by dipping too quickly, earning a sharp rebuke from Thomas, though no blows, for which he's grateful. He thinks of his parents' farm, wonders if his younger brother has taken his place in the fields. In 5 more years he'll be free of his indenture, able to work as a journeyman for wages. Perhaps eventually, if he saves every penny, he might open his own small chandlery. But the path from apprentice to master is treacherous. Even journeymen struggle to save enough to establish their own shops. The initial costs are staggering: cauldrons, furnaces, a suitable building, raw materials, tools. Most journeymen work for others their entire lives, earning just enough to support a family but never enough to rise. The few who succeed often do so by marrying a master's daughter or widow, inheriting an established business rather than building one. The social mobility that later generations will celebrate as the American dream exists in colonial Boston, but it's far more limited than myth suggests. A chandler's son might become a chandler, perhaps a slightly more prosperous one, but he won't become a merchant prince or a gentleman landowner. Those positions are reserved for those born to them, or occasionally those who risk everything in maritime ventures and win against overwhelming odds. As midnight approaches, the workshop finally falls completely silent. The tallow has congealed in the cauldrons, forming a white skin across the surface. The completed candles hang like pale fingers in the darkness. Even the cats have ceased their prowling, curled together for warmth near the still warm furnaces. The only light comes from the banked fires, glowing red through the gaps in the furnace doors. This is the paradox of the candle maker's existence, surrounded by the means to create light, yet living much of life in darkness, working with fire, yet constantly cold in winter, creating products essential for civilization, yet remaining firmly among civilization's laborers. The candles Thomas makes will illuminate grand dinner parties he'll never attend, light the pages of books he cannot afford to buy, brighten churches where he sits in the back pews reserved for tradesmen. Tomorrow will bring variations on today's theme. Perhaps a special order for colored candles, requiring costly dyes imported from the West Indies. Perhaps a complaint from a customer whose candles burned unevenly, demanding replacement or refund. Perhaps news of another ship arriving with spermaceti, driving down tallow prices as customers anticipate better options. The constancy of the work grinds down even the strongest constitution. Thomas has been making candles for 20 years, since his own apprenticeship began at 13. His father was a chandler, as was his grandfather. The trade runs in families because the knowledge is too complex, too nuanced to be easily learned as an adult. The exact temperature for different waxes, the rhythm of dipping, the signs of good tallow versus bad, these things must be absorbed through years of practice. Yet there's also a certain pride in the work, a satisfaction in transforming raw, stinking fat into clean burning light. When Thomas sees his candles burning in the meeting house, illuminating the faces of the congregation, he feels a connection to something larger than himself. He is, in his small way, pushing back the darkness that would otherwise envelop his community. The financial realities, however, are never far from mind. A successful chandler in Colonial Boston might earn £40 a year, enough to maintain a modest household but little more. The truly profitable aspect of the business comes from selling soap, made from the waste products of candle making. But soap making requires additional equipment, knowledge, and the capital to maintain inventory. Thomas hopes to expand into soap within the next 2 years if he can save enough. The tools of the trade, accumulated over decades, represent both investment and inheritance. Thomas's dipping frames were made by his father, the wood worn smooth by countless hands. His ladles bear the marks of the blacksmith who forged them 30 years ago. Even his measuring sticks, notched and stained, carry history in their markings. When Samuel completes his apprenticeship, Thomas will gift him a set of basic tools, as tradition demands, the beginning of the next generation's accumulation. The workshop itself tells stories in its very structure. The walls, darkened by years of smoke, could be scraped to reveal layers like geological strata, each representing different years, different batches, different seasons of plenty or want. The floorboards, worn smooth in paths between cauldron and dipping station, map the daily choreography of the trade. The ceiling beams, notched to hold dipping frames, bear the carved initials of apprentices going back 50 years. As the deepest part of night settles over Boston, Thomas finally allows himself to rest. Tomorrow, before the sun rises, he'll begin again. The tallow will be melted, the wicks will be dipped, the candles will be formed. It's a cycle as predictable as the tides that lap at Boston's wharves, as certain as the sunrise that will eventually pierce the workshop's grimy windows. This is the reality of working life in colonial America, not the dramatic battles or political intrigue that history books remember, but the quiet, exhausting, repetitive labor that actually built the colonies. Men like Thomas Whitmore, whose names appear nowhere in the grand narratives, yet whose work made those narratives possible. For without the chandler's art, the long New England nights would have been darker still, and the work of revolution, still a decade away, would have been impossible to organize in the shadows. The candle-maker's day ends as it began, in darkness with the promise of light to come, both literal, in the candles that will emerge from tomorrow's labor, and metaphorical, in the slow improvement of life that each generation hopes to provide for the next. Samuel, despite his exhaustion and burns, dreams of his own shop someday. Thomas, despite his aching back and tired eyes, takes satisfaction in honest work honestly done. And so the cycle continues, one dip at a time, one candle at a time, one day at a time. The quiet rhythm of colonial craft, maintaining the light that allows society to function, even as that society barely acknowledges the sooty, tired men who make it possible. This is what it meant to be a candle maker in colonial Boston, a life of fire and fat, of careful craft and constant worry, of small pride and smaller profits, a life that modern comfort has allowed us to forget, but which once stood between civilization and the darkness that always waits, just beyond the candle's gentle glow. As we drift from the candlemaker's workshop, let us turn our attention to another craftsman of colonial Boston, one whose name history remembers, though not for the work that filled most of his days. Paul Revere, before he became the midnight rider of legend, was simply a silversmith, waking each morning to the familiar weight of hammer in hand and the gleam of metal awaiting transformation. Picture North Square in 1765, where Revere's home and workshop occupy a modest wooden structure, 3 stories tall, its clapboard sides painted the rusty red that was fashionable among the middling sort. The ground floor serves as both shop and workspace, while the floors above house Paul, his wife Sarah, and their growing family, 6 children at this point, with more to come. The building itself speaks of respectability without ostentation, success without excess. Paul rises at 5:30 each morning, his internal clock calibrated by years of routine. No dramatic midnight rides disturb his rest in these years. Instead, his dreams are filled with the mundane concerns of a working tradesman: the price of silver, the temperament of difficult customers, the apprentice who seems incapable of learning proper polishing technique. He dresses in the dark, careful not to wake Sarah, who needs every moment of rest she can steal between nursing the baby and managing the household. His workshop, as he enters it in the pre-dawn gloom, smells of metal and charcoal, oil and polishing compounds. It's a cleaner scent than the chandler's trade, certainly, but it carries its own distinct signature. The cool bite of silver tarnish mingles with the earthier smell of the forge, creating an atmosphere that marks him as surely as any sign above his door. The tools of the silversmith's trade lie arranged with meticulous precision on his workbench. Hammers in 20 different sizes and weights, each one serving a specific purpose. Raising hammers for forming bowls, planishing hammers for smoothing surfaces, chasing hammers for decorative work. The handles, worn smooth by his father's hands and now his own, fit his grip perfectly. These tools are his inheritance, more valuable than any sum of money. Paul's father, Apollos Rivewar, had arrived from France as a Huguenot refugee, changing his name to Paul Revere to sound more English. The elder Revere established this shop, built this reputation, and passed both to his son along with the skills to maintain them. Young Paul had learned the trade at his father's bench, his small hands struggling with tools too large, his child's patience tested by the endless hours of polishing required to achieve the mirror finish that distinguished fine silver from merely adequate work. The morning's first task is always the same, checking the work left to cool overnight. A teapot, commissioned by merchant John Hancock, sits under a cloth cover. Paul lifts the fabric carefully, examining the spouts joined to the body. The solder line must be invisible, the curve perfect, the balance exact when lifted. He tests it, noting a slight heaviness toward the spout that will require adjustment. Such details separate master craftsmen from mere workers. His apprentice, Joshua Brackett, arrives as the church bells toll 6. The boy is 15, in his 3rd year of service, showing promise but still prone to the carelessness of youth. Yesterday, he overheated a piece of silver while annealing, causing it to develop fire scale that took hours to remove. Today, Paul will have him practice simpler work, polishing spoons perhaps where mistakes are less costly. The workshop begins to warm as Paul lights the forge. Unlike the chandler's constant fires, the silversmith's forge burns hot and fast when needed, then cools between tasks. The charcoal must be of the highest quality, burning clean without sulfur that might contaminate the silver. Paul sources his from a particular charcoal burner in Dedham, a man who understands that different woods produce different qualities of heat. The morning light, filtering through windows kept cleaner than most in Boston, illuminates the current works in progress. Besides Hancock's teapot, there's a set of shoe buckles for Reverend Mayhew, 6 tablespoons for the widow Henderson, and most ambitious of all, a complete tea service for Thomas Hutchinson, the lieutenant governor. This last commission weighs heavily on Paul's mind, both for its complexity and its political implications. The politics of colonial Boston infiltrate even the silversmith's workshop. Hutchinson represents the Crown's authority, increasingly unpopular among the artisan class. Yet his commission could establish Paul's reputation among the colonial elite. It's a delicate balance, one that requires Paul to maintain cordial relations with both patriots and loyalists. In a few years, such neutrality will become impossible, but for now, business is business. Sarah appears at 7, bringing breakfast, bread with butter, small beer, and occasionally, when finances permit, a bit of cheese or cold meat. She moves through the workshop with practiced efficiency, having learned long ago which tools can be touched and which cannot, where it's safe to step and where precious metal filings might be scattered. The marriage of a craftsman requires understanding of the craft itself. The economics of Paul's household are complex and precarious. A successful silversmith might earn £60 a year, more than a chandler certainly, but still firmly in the artisan class. Yet silver work requires significant capital. Customers provide the raw silver, usually in the form of coins, but Paul must maintain inventory of solder, flux, polishing compounds, and charcoal. A single mistake, one ruined piece, might erase a week's profit. Today's primary work involves the continuation of Hutchinson's tea service. The sugar bowl requires particular attention. Its lid must fit perfectly, neither too loose nor too tight. Paul heats the silver carefully, watching for the exact moment when it becomes malleable but not liquid. This is knowledge that cannot be taught through words alone. It must be observed, felt, absorbed through countless repetitions. The technique of raising, forming a vessel from a flat sheet of silver, demands both strength and delicacy. Paul places the silver disc over a shaped stake and begins the rhythmic hammering that will gradually coax it into form. Each blow must land precisely, overlapping the previous strike, creating a spiral pattern that slowly draws the metal upward. Too hard and the silver will thin dangerously. Too soft and it won't move properly. Joshua watches intently, trying to memorize the angle of Paul's wrist, the rhythm of his strikes. He's attempted raising only a few times, producing lopsided bowls that Paul melted down to recover the silver. The boy knows it will be years before he's trusted with such work for customers. For now, he contents himself with simpler tasks, filing rough edges, polishing completed pieces, maintaining the tools. The social dynamics of the workshop reflect Boston's broader hierarchies. When customers enter, Joshua must stop whatever he's doing to attend them, offering refreshment, taking initial inquiries. Paul only emerges for serious negotiations or important clients. This theater of commerce requires each participant to play their role: the deferential apprentice, the dignified master, the discerning customer. Around 9 o'clock, the shop door opens to admit Thomas Crafts, a painter and fellow member of the North End caucus. This political club, meeting at the Green Dragon Tavern, brings together artisans and small merchants to discuss, carefully and quietly, their grievances against British trade policies. Paul sets aside his hammer, knowing this visit concerns more than silver. The conversation, conducted in low voices despite the workshop's privacy, touches on the recent Stamp Act. The requirement to purchase stamped paper for legal documents has enraged the colonial population. As artisans who depend on written contracts and receipts, both men feel the burden keenly. Yet they speak in euphemisms, aware that walls have ears and seditious talk carries consequences. This network of artisan connections forms the backbone of Paul's life. He knows every tradesman in the North End, the bakers and butchers, carpenters and coopers, blacksmiths and brass founders. They share techniques, warn each other of difficult customers, provide mutual aid when illness or injury strikes. It's a community bound by shared struggle and modest ambitions. After Crafts departs, Paul returns to his work with renewed focus. The sugar bowl is taking shape, its walls rising smooth and even under his hammer. The repetitive nature of the work allows his mind to wander, though his hands never falter. He thinks of his children's futures, wondering if they'll follow him into the trade. His eldest son, Paul Jr., shows aptitude but little enthusiasm. The afternoon brings a different sort of customer. Mrs. Elizabeth Murray, a wealthy widow who runs her own importing business. She wants a pair of candlesticks repaired, their bases having separated from the columns. Such repair work is less prestigious than creating new pieces, but it provides steady income. Paul examines the damage, quotes a price, endures her attempts to negotiate it lower. The gendered dynamics of colonial commerce require Paul to navigate carefully. While most of his customers are men, wealthy widows and married women of the merchant class also commission work. They often prove shrewder negotiators than their male counterparts, perhaps because they must fight harder for respect in business dealings. Paul has learned to treat them with the same professional courtesy he offers anyone, a progressive attitude that serves him well. The actual repair of the candlesticks reveals the earlier silversmith's inferior technique. The original solder was poorly mixed, too much lead and not enough silver, causing it to fail prematurely. Paul must remove all traces of the old joint, clean both surfaces to bare metal, and create a new join that will last. It's painstaking work that requires complete concentration. Young Joshua, meanwhile, has been set to polishing spoons. The technique requires consistent pressure and circular motions, building up heat through friction until the silver begins to gleam. It's monotonous work that makes his arms ache and his fingers cramp. Yet it's essential training, teaching him to recognize the different grades of finish, from the soft glow appropriate for everyday items to the mirror shine required for display pieces. The tools for polishing have their own hierarchy. First, files to remove the deepest scratches and tool marks. Then progressively finer abrasives, pumice stone ground to powder, rotten stone for the penultimate stage, and finally, jeweler's rouge for the ultimate shine. Each compound must be completely cleaned away before applying the next. lest coarser particles scratch the carefully prepared surface. As the afternoon wears on, the workshop receives several visitors. A ship's captain wanting his buckles repaired before sailing. A young couple, newly engaged, seeking wedding rings. An elderly woman bringing foreign coins to be assessed for their silver content. Each interaction requires Paul to shift roles: craftsman, merchant, metallurgist, social equal or inferior depending on the customer's station. The wedding rings present a particular challenge. The couple has limited funds but specific desires. They want inscriptions inside the bands, their initials intertwined. Such engraving work demands steady hands and perfect concentration. One slip of the graving tool and the ring is ruined. Paul accepts the commission despite the low profit, remembering his own youth when Sarah's simple ring represented months of saving. The technique of engraving differs from the hammer work that dominates Paul's day. Here, the metal is cut away rather than shaped, using specialized tools called gravers or burins. The design must first be marked out with scratches so light they're barely visible. Then, following these guidelines, Paul cuts the metal in smooth, controlled strokes. The intertwined initials emerge slowly, each curve requiring multiple passes to achieve the proper depth. The concentration required for such work is absolute. Paul's breathing slows, his hand steadies, the outside world fades away. This is the meditative aspect of craftsmanship that outsiders rarely understand, the way repetitive, skilled work can transport the mind to a place of profound calm. In these moments, Paul exists only in the intersection of tool and metal, intention and execution. By 4 o'clock, the light has begun to fade, making detailed work increasingly difficult. Candles could extend the working day, but they cast shadows that make precision work dangerous. One misplaced hammer blow in poor light could ruin hours of labor. Paul begins the process of shutting down the forge, banking the coals to preserve them for tomorrow. The end-of-day ritual includes careful accounting of materials. Every grain of silver dust must be swept up and saved. The floor sweepings will eventually be refined to recover the precious metal. Even the water used for quenching is filtered through cloth to capture any particles. In a trade where raw materials represent such significant cost, waste is intolerable. Joshua's final task is cleaning and organizing the tools. Each hammer must be wiped clean of fingerprints that might cause rust. The stakes and anvils must be checked for dents or damage. The gravers must be wrapped in oiled cloth to prevent corrosion. This routine maintenance might seem tedious, but tools well maintained will last generations while neglected ones fail within years. The accounting books claim Paul's attention as natural light fades. Every transaction must be recorded: materials used, time spent, payment received or promised. The colonial economy operates largely on credit, with accounts settled quarterly or even annually. Paul maintains relationships with dozens of customers who owe him money, while he in turn owes suppliers and creditors. The complexity of these financial relationships reveals the precarious nature of artisan life. One customer's bankruptcy might cascade through the community, leaving craftsmen unable to pay their own debts. Paul has learned to spread his risk, never allowing any single customer to owe too much, maintaining reserves when possible against future difficulties. Sarah returns to collect the dinner tray, bringing news from the household. Young Paul has been fighting at school again, defending his father's reputation against boys who mock the French silversmith. Baby Mary is cutting teeth, keeping everyone awake with her crying. The maid has given notice, finding work in a wealthier household that can pay more. These domestic concerns weigh on Paul as heavily as his professional ones. The cost of maintaining a respectable household in Boston continues to rise. Food, fuel, clothing for growing children, school fees for the boys, medical care when illness strikes. The silver business must support it all, a burden that sometimes feels heavier than any hammer in his shop. The evening brings time for additional work that supplements the silversmithing. Paul has taught himself copper engraving, producing trade cards, book plates, and even sheet music for local publishers. This work, while less prestigious than silver, provides steady income and requires less capital investment. Tonight, he works on a billhead design for a merchant, carefully cutting letters into the copper plate. The copper engraving requires different skills than silver work. The plate must be heated just enough to soften the surface without warping it. The burin must be kept at precisely the right angle, cutting cleanly through the metal without chattering or skipping. Each letter must be cut in reverse, a mental gymnastics that took Paul months to master. The merchant's name emerges slowly: Jonathan Forward, importer of fine goods. This secondary trade connects Paul to Boston's printing community, another network of artisans and intellectuals who will prove crucial in the years ahead. The printers and engravers meet at different taverns than the silversmiths, their conversations tending toward philosophy and politics rather than trade concerns. Paul moves between these worlds, comfortable in both yet fully belonging to neither. As he works, Paul's mind drifts to a commission he recently completed that troubled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. A silver gorget for a British officer, decorated with the royal arms. The piece was technically perfect, the engraving crisp, the polish flawless, yet creating symbols of British authority increasingly sits uneasily with Paul's growing political consciousness. The sound of footsteps on the stairs draws his attention. Sarah appears with a mug of flip, that warming mixture of beer, rum, and molasses that provides comfort on cool October evenings. She watches him work for a moment, her presence a quiet reminder of the world beyond the workshop. They've been married 12 years now, their partnership deepened by shared struggles and small victories. Sarah's contribution to the family economy extends far beyond household management. She maintains the workshop's account books when Paul is away, deals with customers in his absence, and even performs simple polishing work when orders pile up. Like many artisan wives, she's an unofficial partner in the business, though law and custom deny her any formal recognition. The children's voices drift down from above, their mother having allowed them a few minutes of play before bed. Paul thinks of his father, dead these 11 years, who built this business from nothing. Apollos Revere arrived in Boston with only his skills and determination, speaking broken English, facing prejudice against French immigrants. Yet he persevered, earned respect, provided for his family. This legacy of immigration and adaptation shapes Paul's worldview in subtle ways. He understands what it means to be an outsider seeking acceptance, to prove oneself through skill and reliability rather than birthright. Perhaps this explains his comfort among the diverse artisan community, where German blacksmiths work alongside English carpenters and Irish laborers. The Green Dragon Tavern, where Paul will go after finishing his engraving, serves as the informal parliament of Boston's working men. Here, master craftsmen gather to discuss wages and prices, apprenticeship terms, and increasingly, their grievances against British trade policies. The Stamp Act has awakened political consciousness among men who previously concerned themselves only with their trades. But tonight's work must be completed first. The copper plate gradually fills with text and decorative elements, flourishes around the merchant's name, small engravings of ships and barrels suggesting overseas trade, a border of interlocking geometric patterns that showcase Paul's skill. This single plate will print hundreds of billheads, each one advertising both the merchant and the engraver. The technical demands of engraving differ from silver work in crucial ways. Mistakes cannot be easily corrected. A slip of the burin creates a line that will appear on every print. While silver can be melted and reformed, copper plates must be abandoned and begun anew if seriously flawed. This pressure for perfection appeals to something in Paul's nature, a desire for permanence in an uncertain world. Joshua has long since retired to his small room in the attic, exhausted from his day of polishing and fetching. The boy shows promise but lacks the natural feel for metal that distinguishes great craftsmen from merely competent ones. Paul wonders if he should release him to find another trade where his talents might better flourish. It would be a kindness, perhaps, though finding another apprentice would be difficult. The workshop at night takes on a different character. The shadows cast by his working candle create deep pools of darkness in the corners. Tools become abstract shapes, their purpose hidden. The forge, now cold, seems smaller somehow, less commanding. This is Paul's private domain, where the performative aspects of craft fall away, leaving only the pure interaction between maker and material. The completed billhead design represents 4 hours of concentrated work, worth perhaps £50 when printed and delivered. Not insignificant money, but hardly the path to wealth. Paul calculates that he must maintain at least 3 different income streams: silver work, engraving, and occasional dental work, having learned to craft false teeth from ivory and gold wire, to support his family adequately. The clock on the mantel, a German piece that Paul repaired in exchange for credit at the clockmaker's shop, chimes 9 o'clock. Time to clean his tools, cover the copper plate, and prepare for the tavern. But first, he climbs the narrow stairs to look in on his children. They sleep in 2 rooms, the boys in one, the girls in another, their breathing deep and regular. Paul Jr., his eldest at 11, lies with one arm hanging off the bed, his face smooth in sleep. During the day, he tries so hard to appear grown, helping in the workshop, carrying himself with premature dignity. But sleep reveals him as the child he still is. Paul adjusts his blanket, thinking of the burden of expectations that eldest sons carry in artisan families. The girl's room is warmer, heated by the chimney that runs through it. Deborah and Francis sleep peacefully, but baby Mary stirs at Paul's entrance. He picks her up before she can wake the others, feeling her small weight against his shoulder. She smells of milk and the lavender Sarah uses in the wash. These quiet moments of fatherhood provide respite from the endless demands of commerce. Returning Mary to her cradle, Paul prepares for his evening out. His good coat, kept for public appearances, shows wear at the elbows despite Sarah's careful darning. His hat, once fashionably cocked, has lost its shape from Boston's frequent rains. Yet he carries himself with the dignity of his trade, knowing that reputation matters as much as appearance in colonial society. The streets of the North End at night present a different world from their daytime bustle. Most windows are dark, decent folk having retired with the sun. Only taverns show light, their windows glowing warmly in the darkness. Paul navigates by memory more than sight, his feet finding their way around familiar obstacles. A perpetually broken cobblestone here, a water trough there. The Green Dragon Tavern, properly called the Green Dragon and Still, occupies a corner building on Union Street. Its sign, a copper dragon that Paul himself repaired last year, creaks in the evening breeze. Through the diamond-paned windows, he can see the warm glow of candles and the shadows of men gathered around tables. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke and the yeasty smell of ale. The tavern caters to artisans and small merchants, men who work with their hands and minds rather than their connections. The conversations flow in multiple languages. English predominates, but Paul catches fragments of German, Dutch, and his father's French. At their usual table sit the core members of the North End caucus. Benjamin Eads, the printer whose press produces increasingly bold criticism of British policies. Thomas Crafts, the painter who visited Paul's shop this morning. John Pulling, a ship's captain whose travels bring news from other colonies. These men, unremarkable individually, collectively represent the growing discontent of Boston's middle sort. Paul takes his seat, accepting a mug of ale from the serving girl. The conversation tonight centers on the new Sugar Act and its impact on trade. Pulling reports that molasses prices have risen sharply, affecting not just rum distillers but every tradesman who depends on Flip and Toddy to warm his workers. The indirect effects of British taxation touch everyone, even those who never handle a customs document. Yet the talk remains carefully circumspect. Everyone knows that Crown officials have informants in every tavern. Words that might be construed as seditious are avoided, replaced by elaborate circumlocutions. They speak of difficulties rather than oppression, concerns rather than resistance. But the meaning is clear to all present. Paul contributes his own observations about the decline in luxury commissions. Fewer merchants are ordering elaborate silver services, uncertain about future prosperity. The economic uncertainty created by British policies affects every level of society, from dock workers to master craftsmen. The silver trade, dependent on discretionary spending, serves as an early warning of broader economic troubles. As the evening deepens, the conversation turns to more practical matters. The price of charcoal, which has risen due to new restrictions on woodland cutting. The shortage of skilled apprentices, as young men increasingly seek their fortunes at sea rather than in workshops. The difficulty of obtaining credit when colonial currency fluctuates wildly against sterling. These mundane concerns occupy far more of their time than grand political theories. Revolution, still a decade away, is unimaginable to these men who seek only to practice their trades in peace. They want reform, not rebellion, adjustment, not independence. Their radicalism, such as it is, extends only to demanding the rights of Englishmen, not rejecting English rule entirely. Paul leaves the tavern at 11, later than intended. The streets are now completely dark save for the occasional lantern required by law but often ignored. He walks quickly, alert for footpads who prey on solitary travelers. His hand rests on the small knife he carries, though he's never had occasion to use it in anger. Back in his workshop, Paul performs one final check of the day. The copper plate sits safely covered on his bench. The silver pieces in progress are locked in the iron strongbox bolted to the floor. The tools are cleaned and arranged. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new commissions, new compromises between artistry and commerce. He climbs the stairs slowly, his legs tired from standing all day. Sarah stirs as he enters their bedchamber but doesn't wake. Paul undresses in darkness, hanging his clothes carefully on their pegs. The bed ropes creak as he settles beside his wife, the feather mattress a luxury they saved 3 years to afford. As sleep approaches, Paul's mind drifts over the day's accomplishments. The sugar bowl progressing well, the wedding rings successfully engraved, the billhead completed. Small victories in an artisan's life, barely worthy of note in any historical record. Yet these quiet accomplishments, multiplied across thousands of workshops throughout the colonies, build the foundation of American prosperity. In a decade, Paul Revere will ride into history, his name immortalized by a poem that captures one night of drama while ignoring 40 years of daily craft. But tonight, in October 1765, he's simply a tired silversmith whose hands ache from hammering, whose eyes burn from close work, whose mind struggles to balance artistry with commerce, family with trade, personal dignity with economic necessity. The church bells toll midnight as Paul finally sleeps, their bronze voices, cast by another sort of metalworker, marking time's passage through the colonial night. Tomorrow, he'll wake again at 5:30, dress in darkness, descend to his workshop, and continue the patient labor of transforming raw metal into objects of beauty and utility. This is the Paul Revere history forgets, not the midnight rider but the daily craftsman, not the revolutionary but the respectable artisan, not the hero but the husband, father, and tradesman who built his life one hammer blow at a time. His story, like that of countless other colonial craftsmen, reminds us that history is made not just in dramatic moments but in the accumulated weight of ordinary days, ordinary work, ordinary lives lived with quiet dignity in the face of constant challenge. As we leave Paul Revere's workshop and venture toward Boston's Long Wharf, the autumn wind carries a different scent entirely. Not the metallic tang of the silversmith's forge or the thick smell of tallow, but something more mysterious, a clean, almost sweet aroma that seems to glow in the very air. This is the smell of spermaceti, the most prized substance in all of colonial illumination, extracted from the massive heads of sperm whales that swim in the deep waters far from shore. The story of how whale oil came to light the 18th century is one of maritime adventure, chemical mystery, and economic transformation. It begins not in Boston's workshops but thousands of miles out to sea, where massive creatures the size of buildings move through underwater canyons that no human eye has seen. The sperm whale, that great leviathan of the deep, carries in its enormous head a substance that would reshape the colonial economy. Consider for a moment the peculiarity of this arrangement. Inside the whale's head, occupying up to a third of its body length, sits a great case filled with a waxy liquid that serves purposes marine biologists still debate. Some say it aids in buoyancy control, allowing the whale to dive to crushing depths. Others believe it focuses sound for echolocation in the pitch-black deep. But for colonial candle makers, its purpose was clear. This was nature's finest illuminant, created by processes they couldn't begin to understand. The spermaceti organ, as naturalists would later name it, contains up to 500 gallons of this precious substance in a large whale. When fresh, it has the consistency of milk, but upon exposure to air, it congeals into a white, crystalline wax unlike anything else in nature. It burns with a bright, clear flame that produces no smoke, no smell, and gives off more light than any other fuel known to the 18th century. But how did colonists discover this remarkable property? The indigenous peoples of Nantucket and Cape Cod had long known that whales washing ashore contained useful materials. They used whale oil for light and heat, teaching these techniques to the earliest European settlers. But spermaceti was different, more refined, more mysterious, requiring special knowledge to extract and process. The transformation of spermaceti from a curiosity to an industry began in the early 1700s on the island of Nantucket. Here, Quaker families like the Macy's, Coffins, and Starbucks developed techniques for hunting whales in open ocean rather than waiting for them to beach themselves. These early whalers noticed that the oil from sperm whales differed from that of right whales or humpbacks. It burned cleaner, lasted longer, and most remarkably, seemed to glow with its own inner light. The chemistry of spermaceti, unknown to colonial processors, is fascinating. It consists primarily of cetyl palmitate, a wax ester that gives it unique properties. Unlike tallow, which is composed of triglycerides that break down and smell when burned, spermaceti remains stable at high temperatures. Its molecular structure creates a crystalline matrix when cooled, trapping air in microscopic pockets that contribute to its luminous appearance. The processing of spermaceti in colonial Boston reveals a craft shrouded in trade secrets and careful technique. The raw material arrives at the wharf in great casks, having been collected at sea and partially processed aboard ship. The whalers have already separated the spermaceti from the darker, less valuable whale oil, but much work remains to transform it into the pristine white candles that grace wealthy homes. Picture the spermaceti works of Jacob Rodriguez Rivera, one of the few men in Boston who truly understands the art. His facility, located near the harbor to receive shipments directly, consists of a series of pressing rooms, cooling chambers, and crystallization vats. The process begins with gentle heating. Too much heat destroys the delicate structure that gives spermaceti its superior qualities. The liquid spermaceti is first strained through multiple layers of flannel to remove any impurities, fragments of tissue, blood, or other whale products that might contaminate the final product. This straining must be done while the spermaceti is warm enough to flow, but not so hot that it breaks down. Rivera has thermometers, rare and expensive instruments imported from London to monitor the temperature precisely. Next comes the pressing, a process that separates the pure spermaceti from the remaining oil. The semi-solid mass is wrapped in strong canvas bags and placed in a screw press, similar to those used for making cider but built more robustly. As pressure increases, clear oil seeps out, leaving behind a cake of white, crystalline wax. This oil, called pressed whale oil, is valuable in its own right, burning in lamps throughout the colonies. The pressed cakes require further refinement. They're broken up and dissolved in hot water, then allowed to cool slowly in shallow pans. As the mixture cools, the spermaceti crystallizes into sheets of pure white wax that float to the surface. These sheets are lifted out carefully, for rough handling breaks the crystal structure and reduces quality. But here's where the process becomes almost alchemical. Rivera adds secret ingredients to enhance the spermaceti's qualities. A small amount of potash to increase whiteness, a trace of camphor to improve burning characteristics. Some processors add pearl ash or even powdered mother of pearl, believing these substances enhance the candle's luminosity. The exact recipes are closely guarded secrets, passed from master to apprentice under oaths of silence. The economic implications of the spermaceti trade ripple through colonial society in complex ways. A single pound of pure spermaceti costs as much as a laborer earns in a week. Yet the demand from wealthy merchants, government officials, and religious institutions seems limitless. These candles have become symbols of refinement and prosperity, their clear light distinguishing the elite from those who must make do with smoking tallow. The Spermaceti Trust, formed in 1761, represents one of America's first attempts at industrial monopoly. 8 prominent candle manufacturers, including Rivera, agreed to fix prices and divide the supply of head matter. Each member received a specific proportion of all spermaceti brought into colonial ports. This arrangement, while enriching its members, also ensured quality standards and stable supply. The trust operates through a complex system of rules and penalties. Members who sell below the agreed price face fines of £50. Those who purchase spermaceti outside the trust risk expulsion and commercial ostracism. Monthly meetings at the Bunch of Grapes Tavern in Boston involve heated negotiations over quotas, quality standards, and responses to competition from European processors. The whaling industry that supplies this precious material operates on a scale that defies modern comprehension. Ships leave Nantucket and New Bedford for voyages lasting 2, 3, even 4 years. They sail to the coast of Africa, around Cape Horn to the Pacific, following the great whales on migrations that span half the globe. Each ship represents an investment of thousands of pounds, carrying crews of 20 to 30 men who risk everything for a share of the profits. The rituals and superstitions surrounding whaling and spermaceti reveal deep cultural anxieties about light and darkness. Whalers carry candles made from spermaceti taken from the first whale of each voyage, believing these virgin candles possess special properties. Some claim they can predict weather changes by the way these candles burn. Others insist that spermaceti candles blessed by ministers will protect houses from lightning. In Boston's wealthy homes, the display of spermaceti candles follows elaborate social protocols. They're reserved for important occasions: dinner parties, holiday celebrations, visits from distinguished guests. The lady of the house keeps careful count, for each candle represents significant expense. Special storage boxes, lined with paper and lavender, preserve them from dust and insects. The belief in spermaceti's almost magical properties extends beyond mere illumination. Some physicians prescribe it as medicine, claiming it cures everything from consumption to melancholy. Mixed with rose water and applied to the skin, it supposedly prevents aging. Dissolved in wine and drunk before bed, it's said to prevent nightmares. These beliefs, while scientifically unfounded, reflect the mysterious aura surrounding this substance from the deep ocean. Strange recipes circulate among candle makers for enhancing ordinary candles with traces of spermaceti. One calls for dissolving a single spermaceti candle in a gallon of hot tallow, claiming this will make the entire batch burn cleaner. Another suggests adding powdered sperm whale teeth to the wick for brighter light. These recipes, part chemistry and part magic, represent attempts to democratize luxury, to bring a hint of elite illumination to common households. The maritime trade routes that bring spermaceti to Boston connect the city to a global economy of light. Ships carrying whale products sail to London, where spermaceti commands even higher prices. They travel to the West Indies, trading candles for sugar and molasses. Some venture to the Mediterranean, where spermaceti candles light Catholic churches and Moorish palaces alike. The insurance records at Boston's Customs House reveal the risks of this trade. Ships lost to storms off Cape Hatteras. Crews decimated by scurvy in the Pacific. Entire cargoes spoiled by heat crossing the equator. Each disaster drives up prices, making surviving shipments even more valuable. The candle makers who depend on steady supplies must constantly adjust to these uncertainties. The processing of other whale products alongside spermaceti creates a complex industrial ecology. The blubber is tried out into oil for lamps. The bones are ground for fertilizer or carved into corset stays. The ambergris, if found, is worth its weight in gold for perfume making. Even the whale's skin finds use, tanned into a leather so durable it outlasts the men who wear it. But it's the cultural meaning of spermaceti light that truly defines its importance. In an age before electric illumination, the quality of light directly affected quality of life. Spermaceti candles allow reading and fine work to continue long after sunset. They enable social gatherings that would otherwise end with daylight. They represent humanity's victory over the darkness that has constrained human activity since the dawn of time. Consider a Boston drawing room illuminated by spermaceti candles. The light they produce is markedly different from tallow, cleaner, whiter, more akin to daylight. Faces appear more natural, colors more true. The absence of smoke means paintings and wallpapers remain pristine. The lack of smell allows the delicate fragrances of pomanders and potpourri to perfume the air. The scientific principles behind spermacede's superior illumination, though not understood in colonial times, are now clear. The subtle palmitate burns at a higher temperature than tallow, producing more complete combustion. The crystalline structure of the wax creates multiple surfaces that reflect and amplify light. The absence of glycerol means no acrolein forms, eliminating the unpleasant smell of burning fat. Yet for all its superiority, spermacede remains frustratingly finite. The number of sperm whales is vast but not infinite. Already, whalers report having to sail farther to find pods. The easy hunting grounds off Nantucket are depleted. Ships now venture to the Azores, the coast of Japan, the Antarctic seas in search of prey. The workers in spermacede processing facilities face their own particular hazards. The constant handling of whale products leaves their clothes and skin permeated with a distinctive scent, not unpleasant like tallow, but strange and marine, marking them as clearly as any uniform. The hot pressing rooms in summer become almost unbearable. The risk of fire from heating great quantities of oil keeps insurance rates prohibitively high. The apprentices learning this trade must master not just the mechanical processes, but also the ability to judge quality by sight, smell, and touch. They learn to distinguish between spermacede from different parts of the whale's head. The junk, as whalers call the lower portion, yields inferior product compared to the case above it. They must recognize when spermacede has been adulterated with stearin or regular whale oil, practices that unscrupulous suppliers attempt regularly. The seasonal rhythms of the spermacede trade differ from other colonial industries. Whaling ships return primarily in autumn and spring, creating gluts followed by scarcity. Prices fluctuate wildly based on supply. A successful whaling season might see prices drop by half, while a poor one sends them soaring. Candle makers must decide whether to buy when supplies are abundant or risk waiting for better prices. The social networks that control the spermacede trade extend beyond mere business arrangements. Marriages unite whaling families with processing families. Sons are sent to apprentice with trusted partners. Information about new processing techniques or promising whaling grounds is shared within these closed circles. Outsiders attempting to enter the trade face not just commercial competition but social exclusion. The legal frameworks surrounding the spermacede trade reveal colonial America's struggle to regulate new industries. Maritime law governs the whale hunt itself, with complex rules about ownership of whales struck but not killed. Custom house regulations determine import duties, though enforcement remains spotty. Local ordinances restrict where processing facilities can operate, as even odorless spermacede processing produces waste products that concern neighbors. The account books of spermacede dealers tell stories of fortunes made and lost. Consider Jonathan Brown, who invested his entire inheritance in a shipment of head matter, only to have it seized by British customs officials on a technicality. Or Samuel Waters, who cornered the market in 1764, making enough profit in 6 months to purchase 3 houses and retire. These dramatic swings of fortune attract both the desperate and the shrewd to the trade. The chemistry knowledge of colonial processors, while limited by modern standards, shows remarkable empirical understanding. They know that spermacede must be cooled gradually to form proper crystals, though they attribute this to allowing the spirit of the whale to settle. They understand that certain temperatures produce different textures, though they measure this by touch rather than thermometers. Their practical knowledge often exceeds their theoretical understanding. The religious implications of using whale products cause surprising controversy in some quarters. Certain ministers argue that sperm whales, being mentioned in Scripture as Leviathan, are too sacred for commercial exploitation. Others claim that God placed these creatures in the ocean specifically for man's use. The Quakers of Nantucket, who dominate whaling, see their dangerous profession as a form of spiritual trial. The actual whale hunt itself deserves consideration, for it's this perilous activity that makes spermacety possible. Picture a whaling ship, 3 years out from New Bedford, somewhere in the vast Pacific. The crew hasn't seen land in 4 months. Their diet consists of salt pork, hardtack, and whatever fish they can catch. Scurvy has loosened teeth, made gums bleed, turned strong men weak. Then comes the cry from the masthead. There she blows. A sperm whale has surfaced 2 miles off the starboard bow. The ship erupts into controlled chaos. Whaleboats are lowered, 6 men to each. They row in silence, approaching the whale from behind to avoid detection. The harpooner stands in the bow, his weapon ready, waiting for the perfect moment. The danger cannot be overstated. Sperm whales are not gentle giants but aggressive predators with teeth the size of wine bottles. They've been known to ram ships, crushing hulls with their massive heads. When harpooned, they sound deep, dragging boats on what whalers call a Nantucket sleigh ride. Men are regularly maimed or killed, swept overboard, crushed between boat and whale. If the hunt succeeds, the real work begins. The whale must be secured alongside the ship, its head removed with massive cutting spades. The case is opened carefully, for the spermacety begins to leak out immediately. Men lower themselves into the head cavity, scooping out the precious substance with buckets. It's nightmarish work, standing waist-deep in whale brain matter, trying not to think about what surrounds you. The trying out process aboard ship transforms blubber into oil through a hell of smoke and flame. Great trypots on deck boil day and night, fed by scraps of blubber that create a self-sustaining fire. The smoke is black and acrid, coating everything with greasy soot. Men work in shifts, stirring the pots, skimming the oil, their faces masks of exhaustion and grime. Yet this is necessary to prevent the whale products from spoiling during the long voyage home. Back in Boston, the refined spermacety enters elaborate distribution networks. Merchants like John Hancock control much of the wholesale trade, selling to retailers throughout New England. Peddlers carry small quantities to rural areas where a single spermacety candle might be a family's only luxury. Ship chandlers supply vessels heading to Europe with cases of candles that will be sold for enormous profits in London or Paris. The packaging of spermacety candles reflects their luxury status. Each candle is wrapped in fine paper, often printed with the maker's mark. They're packed in wooden boxes lined with sawdust or straw to prevent breakage. Some makers include certificates of purity, sworn statements that no tallow or lesser waxes have been mixed with the spermacety. These certificates, like the candles themselves, become status symbols. The impact on domestic life in colonial Boston varies dramatically by class. In wealthy homes, spermacety candles transform evening activities. Children can study longer, improving their education. Women can continue needlework after dark, producing finer garments. Men can read newspapers and pamphlets, staying informed about political developments. The quality of light directly affects the quality of life. Yet for most colonists, spermacety remains an impossible dream. A single candle costs what a laborer earns in a day. They must content themselves with tallow or, if fortunate, bayberry. Some save for months to buy one spermacety candle for Christmas or a wedding. Others never experience its clear light, living their entire lives in the smoky, smelly illumination of animal fat. The medical uses of spermacety, while largely ineffective, reveal colonial understanding of health and healing. Apothecaries sell spermaceti ointments for burns and wounds. Midwives use it to ease childbirth, claiming it softens tissue. Consumptives drink it melted in warm milk, believing it coats and soothes damaged lungs. These treatments, though useless medicinally, provide psychological comfort to those who can afford them. The artistic representations of spermaceti light appear in paintings and literature of the period. Portrait artists insist on spermaceti candles when painting wealthy subjects, claiming only this light reveals true skin tones. Poets write odes to its celestial glow. Even political writers use spermaceti as metaphor, comparing its pure light to the illumination of reason and liberty. The environmental impact of whaling for spermaceti, though not understood in colonial terms, begins to show. Whale populations near shore are depleted. Ships must venture into more dangerous waters. Some species, like the Atlantic gray whale, are already disappearing. The ecological consequences of removing apex predators from ocean ecosystems won't be understood for centuries, but the effects are already beginning. The technological innovations driven by the spermaceti trade advance colonial industry. Better rendering equipment, improved presses, more accurate scales and measures. The need to process whale products efficiently drives mechanical innovation. Some historians argue that the precise temperature control required for spermaceti processing contributed to later industrial developments in chemical manufacturing. The cultural associations between spermaceti and social status become deeply embedded. To offer guests spermaceti light signals respect and prosperity. To economize by using tallow when spermaceti is expected constitutes a social insult. Young men courting women from wealthy families must somehow afford spermaceti candles for their visits, often borrowing or renting them for the occasion. The end of our exploration into spermaceti brings us to a profound irony. This substance, extracted through incredible danger and processed through careful craft, represents both the apex and the beginning of the end for whale-based lighting. Already, experimenters are working with other illuminants: campine, a dangerous mixture of turpentine and alcohol, coal gas, which will soon light city streets, and eventually petroleum, which will render whaling obsolete. But in 1765, spermaceti remains the finest illuminant known to humanity. Its light graces the halls where revolution is planned, illuminates the papers where new philosophies are written, brightens the workshops where American industry takes shape. The sperm whale, swimming in darkness miles beneath the ocean surface, unknowingly provides the light by which a new nation begins to envision itself. The mystery of spermaceti extends beyond mere chemistry or commerce. It represents humanity's relationship with nature's extremes: the massive whales, the vast oceans, the transformation of biological material into enlightenment itself. Colonial Americans, lacking our scientific understanding, see something almost miraculous in this substance. And perhaps they're not entirely wrong. As we prepare to leave the world of spermaceti and whaling, consider one final scene. A Boston parlor on a winter evening, illuminated by 6 spermaceti candles. Their combined light pushes back the darkness, creating a sphere of warmth and civilization. Around the table sit merchants and ministers, lawyers and physicians, their faces clearly visible in the clean white light. They discuss ideas that will reshape the world: independence, liberty, the rights of man. The candles burn steadily, without smoke or smell, their light constant and true. Each one represents the death of a creature magnificent beyond description, the labor of men who risked everything on dangerous seas, the skill of processors who transformed raw material into refinement. This is the secret of spermaceti. not just its chemical composition or commercial value, but its role in illuminating the age of enlightenment, one candle at a time. The spermaceti trade will continue for another century, reaching its peak just before petroleum makes it obsolete. But in colonial Boston, it represents the pinnacle of human achievement over darkness, a triumph that comes at great cost in human life and animal suffering, yet provides the light by which civilization advances. This paradox, this mixture of progress and price, defines not just the spermaceti trade but the colonial experience itself. Let us now ascend from the workrooms and warehouses of Boston's laboring classes to enter an entirely different world, the refined parlor of Mrs. Margaret Hutchinson, wife of the Lieutenant Governor, on a crisp November afternoon in 1765. Here, in a Georgian mansion on Garden Court Street, candlelight serves not survival but sophistication, not mere function but elaborate social theater. The parlor itself speaks of wealth accumulated over generations of merchant trading. The walls are covered in imported wallpaper, a delicate pattern of Chinese birds and flowering branches that cost more per yard than a chandler earns in a month. The wainscoting, painted in the fashionable shade called dead white, rises 4 feet from floors of polished pine, waxed weekly by servants until they gleam like still water. Above the wainscoting, between the windows, hang oil paintings in gilt frames, portraits of Hutchinson ancestors, a landscape of the English countryside the family left behind, a still life of fruit that has never grown in New England soil. Each painting required dozens of candles to create, artists working through winter evenings to capture the play of light on silk and skin. The furniture arrangement follows strict protocols of Georgian symmetry. 2 matching sofas face each other across a Turkish carpet, its intricate patterns visible even in November's weak afternoon light. Between them sits a tea table of mahogany, its surface polished to such perfection that candle flames reflect in it as if in dark water. Chairs are positioned at precise angles, ready to be drawn into intimate circles for conversation or pushed back against walls for larger gatherings. But it's the chandelier that dominates the room, a magnificent construction of brass and crystal imported from London at shocking expense. 24 candle holders arranged in 2 tiers, each one designed to hold the finest spermaceti candles. The crystals, when the chandelier is fully lit, fracture the light into thousands of tiny rainbows that dance across the ceiling. Mrs. Hutchinson privately calculated that one evening's full illumination costs more than her cook's monthly wages. Margaret Hutchinson herself presides over this domain with the careful attention of a general managing a campaign. At 42, she has mastered the intricate social codes that govern Boston's elite. She knows precisely which candles to light for different occasions, how their placement affects the mood of a gathering, which guests merit the expense of spermaceti, and which must make do with the best beeswax. This afternoon, she prepares for her weekly salon, that peculiarly feminine institution where ladies gather to display their refinement through controlled conversation. The preparations began this morning, with servants cleaning every surface that might reflect candlelight. Glass, silver, and brass must be spotless, for once the candles are lit, every smudge becomes visible, every imperfection magnified. The selection of candles for this afternoon requires careful consideration. Full spermaceti would be ostentatious for a daytime gathering, suggesting either insecurity about one's status or, worse, an attempt to overshadow one's guests. But pure tallow would be an insult, implying the visitors aren't worth proper illumination. Margaret settles on a mixture: spermaceti for the main chandelier, high-quality beeswax for the sconces, and bayberry for the entrance hall, its green tint and subtle fragrance suggesting refined taste without excess. Her lady's maid, Sarah, a young woman from Devonshire who came with impeccable references, assists in the precise placement of candelabra. They must be positioned to provide light without creating harsh shadows on ladies' faces. Too much direct light ages even the youngest complexion. Too little, and the needlework that provides acceptable activity during conversation becomes impossible. The angle matters as much as the intensity. The ritual of lighting begins an hour before the guests arrive. This timing is crucial. Too early and valuable candles burn wastefully. Too late and the smell of smoke from newly lit wicks might linger. Sarah uses a long taper, itself made of twisted paper soaked in wax, moving from candle to candle with practiced grace. Each wick must be trimmed to exactly the right length. Too short and the candle will drown in its own wax, too long and it will smoke. As the room fills with light, its entire character transforms. The wallpaper's birds seem to come alive, their gold-painted details catching the flame. The portraits gain depth, ancestors appearing to watch the proceedings with approval or judgment. The crystal drops on the chandelier create a constellation of small lights, turning the ceiling into a private sky. The first guest to arrive is Mrs. Elizabeth Murray, the wealthy widow who runs her own importing business. A controversial figure, she represents a new type of colonial woman, economically independent, intellectually ambitious, yet careful to maintain the appearance of feminine propriety. She enters the parlor with studied casualness, her practiced eye immediately assessing the level of illumination as a gauge of her social standing in Mrs. Hutchinson's estimation. Next comes Mrs. Dorothy Hancock, wife of the merchant John Hancock, young and eager to establish her position in Boston society. She brings her needlework, an elaborate piece of crewel embroidery that requires good light to execute properly. The quality of a lady's needlework, displayed in these afternoon gatherings, serves as a demonstration of both skill and leisure. Only those wealthy enough to afford abundant candles can produce such fine work. The conversation, as the ladies settle into their positions, follows unwritten but rigid rules. Direct discussion of business or politics is forbidden, yet information about both flows through carefully coded references. "My husband seems particularly occupied these days," might mean anything from financial difficulties to political intrigue. The ability to decode these messages while maintaining an expression of polite interest is an essential social skill. Mrs. Rebecca Winthrop arrives last, as befits her status as descendant of the colony's founding family. Her entrance causes a subtle shift in the room's dynamics. Chairs are adjusted, the best light seated to her position. Even Margaret Hutchinson, secure in her husband's political power, defers to bloodline aristocracy. The candles themselves seem to burn more steadily in the presence of such established authority. The tea service begins, that elaborate dance of porcelain and silver that provides structure for the afternoon. The tea itself, imported from China through London, costs a fortune. But it's the accompaniments that truly display wealth. Sugar, white as snow and twice as expensive, cream so fresh it still carries warmth from the cow, small cakes that required pounds of white flour and precious eggs to create. As natural light begins to fade, the importance of the artificial illumination becomes more apparent. The ladies' faces, carefully powdered and rouged, depend on candlelight's forgiving glow. In the harsh light of day, every line shows, every imperfection stands revealed. But in the soft radiance of beeswax and spermaceti, even women past their prime can recapture something of youthful beauty. The conversation turns to the proper management of household lighting, a topic that allows discussion of domestic economy without appearing mercantile. Mrs. Murray shares her discovery of a new supplier who provides superior beeswax from hives in Connecticut. Mrs. Hancock mentions the difficulty of training servants to properly maintain candles, trimming wicks without disturbing guests. These practical matters, dressed in genteel language, reveal the constant attention required to maintain an illuminated household. Young Miss Apthorpe, recently returned from finishing school in London, describes the lighting at assembly rooms there. They use a new type of reflector behind the sconces, she explains, that doubles the apparent light without additional candles. This intelligence is received with interest. Innovations in illumination technology spread through female social networks as quickly as fashion trends. The needlework proceeds as conversation flows. Each woman works on her chosen project, the click of needles providing a rhythmic undertone to voices. The quality of light directly affects the quality of work possible. Mrs. Winthrop's elaborate tapestry, with its subtle shading of silks, could only be attempted in the best illumination. Lesser lights would make such fine discrimination of color impossible. Margaret's own project, a fire screen decorated with a pastoral scene, serves a practical purpose, protecting complexions from the heat of fireplaces while allowing their light to warm the room. The irony is not lost on her, spending a fortune on candles while simultaneously shielding oneself from free firelight. But fashion demands such contradictions. The social hierarchies of the parlor extend to the very placement of candles. The woman of highest rank sits where the light is most flattering. Younger women, whose beauty needs less assistance, make do with dimmer corners. Older women past the age of vanity often prefer shadows that soften time's ravages. The ability to read these preferences and accommodate them without explicit discussion marks a skilled hostess. As the afternoon progresses, a servant enters silently to light additional candles. This must be done without interrupting conversation, without creating smoke, without drawing attention. The servant, trained for months in this specific task, moves like a shadow, present but unnoticed. The ladies continue their discussion without pause, the gradually increasing light the only acknowledgement of approaching darkness. The topics of conversation, while avoiding direct political discourse, dance around the edges of current events. The Stamp Act is never mentioned directly, but references to difficulties with correspondence and the rising cost of legal matters make positions clear. Mrs. Hutchinson, whose husband represents Crown authority, must navigate carefully. Too much sympathy for colonial complaints might seem disloyal, too little might alienate her guests. The children of the house are brought in briefly, cleaned and dressed for display. They stand in the candlelight like small dolls, reciting prepared greetings, demonstrating their education through carefully rehearsed responses. The quality of light matters here too. Too harsh and childish imperfections show. Too dim, and their carefully arranged clothing loses its effect. They're dismissed quickly, their purpose served. The card tables are now produced, another ritual requiring specific illumination. Whist, the game of choice among Boston's elite, demands enough light to distinguish suits, but not so much that opponents can glimpse one's hand. Special candle screens, decorative shields that block direct light while allowing ambient illumination, are positioned precisely. Some are painted with landscapes or flowers, adding aesthetic pleasure to practical function. The stakes at these card games, while never discussed openly, can be substantial. Debts of honor between ladies are settled quarterly, often involving sums that would support a working family for months. Yet the appearance of casual play must be maintained. Excitement over winning or distress at losing would be tremendously poor form. The candles witness fortunes changing hands with no more emotion than the turning of cards. Mrs. Hancock, whose husband's wealth is new and therefore slightly suspect, consistently loses small amounts, a deliberate strategy to ingratiate herself with established families. She can afford the losses, and the social capital gained is worth more than money. The candlelight that reveals the cards conceals the calculations behind every play. The complexity of maintaining proper illumination extends beyond mere candles. Reflective surfaces must be positioned to maximize light. Mirrors, silver tea services, crystal decanters all serve double duty as functional objects and light amplifiers. Margaret has spent years perfecting the placement of these items, understanding how each surface affects the room's overall luminosity. The servants, meanwhile, maintain constant vigilance over the candles. Wicks must be trimmed between courses, wax drips caught before they stain furniture or clothing. This work must be invisible, performed in the gaps of conversation, the pauses between activities. A good servant can trim a smoking wick without the ladies even noticing the momentary dimming of light. The expense of this afternoon's illumination would shock even prosperous merchants. The chandelier alone, burning for 4 hours, consumes nearly £1 of spermaceti. The various sconces and candelabra add another £1 of beeswax and bayberry. When calculated against the household's annual budget, these afternoon gatherings represent a significant expenditure, justified only by their social necessity. But the true cost extends beyond mere money. The entire household's schedule revolves around these events. Servants spend days preparing, ensuring every surface that might reflect candlelight is perfect. Meals are planned around the availability of natural light for preparation. Even the children's education is scheduled to avoid conflicts with social obligations. The medical concerns about excessive exposure to candlelight occupy some discussion. Mrs. Murray mentions a physician who claims the smoke from inferior candles causes consumption. Mrs. Winthrop counters with her doctor's opinion that spermaceti fumes actually strengthen the lungs. These debates, conducted without scientific foundation, reveal the anxieties of people who spend half their lives in artificial light. The aesthetic considerations of candlelight extend to clothing choices. Certain fabrics show better in artificial light. Silk captures and reflects flame, creating a luminous effect. Velvet absorbs light, creating dramatic shadows in its folds. The colors chosen for evening wear differ from day dress, selected specifically for how they appear in candlelight. Deep blues that look black in daylight become rich and mysterious in flame. Margaret's own gown, a rose-colored silk that cost more than a skilled craftsman's annual wage, was chosen specifically for how it appears in mixed candle and firelight. The color warms her complexion, while the fabric's sheen creates the illusion of movement even when she sits still. Every element of her appearance has been calculated for artificial illumination. The jewelry worn by the ladies has been selected with equal care. Diamonds and crystals capture candlelight, creating small explosions of brilliance with every gesture. Pearls provide a softer glow, their surface seeming to absorb and emit light simultaneously. Gold catches flame colors, while silver reflects the cooler tones of spermaceti. Each woman's choices telegraph messages about wealth, taste, and social ambition. As evening deepens, the transition from natural to artificial light becomes complete. The windows, which earlier admitted autumn sunshine, now reflect the room's interior illumination back at its occupants. The parlor becomes a glowing capsule, separated from the darkening world outside by walls of light and privilege. The ladies exist in a carefully constructed environment where darkness has been temporarily banished. Mrs. Winthrop begins to tell a story about a recent evening party where the hostess, attempting to economize, mixed tallow candles with spermaceti. "The smell," she says with delicate horror, "was simply unbearable. Poor Mrs. Adams spent the entire evening holding her vinaigrette to her nose." The other ladies murmur sympathetically, each privately reviewing their own lighting arrangements for any similar embarrassments. The anecdote serves multiple purposes. It reinforces social standards, warns against false economy, and subtly establishes the speaker's superior position, someone who would never commit such an error. These stories, shared and reshared, create an oral tradition of proper illumination etiquette that governs elite behavior throughout the colonies. The tea table is cleared and reset with stronger refreshments. Madeira wine in crystal decanters, small cakes that glitter with costly sugar, fruits preserved in brandy. The candlelight transforms these offerings into jewel-like displays. The wine glows like liquid rubies, the sugar sparkles like crushed diamonds. Even food becomes part of the lighting design. Margaret notices that one of the chandelier candles has begun to drip, a tiny flaw in the evening's perfection. She signals Sarah with the slightest movement of her fan. The maid appears with a small silver dish, catching the drops before they can fall on the Turkish carpet below. This silent communication, invisible to guests, represents years of training in the minutiae of proper service. The conversation turns to the challenges of maintaining country houses, where proper illumination is even more difficult. At our Newport cottage, Mrs. Hancock shares, the sea air makes the candles burn so strangely. They flicker constantly, and the salt seems to make them smoke. The others nod knowingly. Each family with multiple properties faces the challenge of ensuring adequate lighting supplies at each location. The logistics of candle supply for multiple residences reveals the complexity of elite colonial life. Orders must be placed months in advance. Supplies must be transported carefully to avoid breakage or melting. Storage facilities must maintain proper temperature and humidity. A single household might manage thousands of candles annually, each one requiring individual attention. Young Miss Apthorpe raises a delicate topic, the proper lighting for courtship. When Mr. Williams calls, she says with calculated casualness, Mother insists on full illumination, but surely a softer light would be more appropriate. The older women exchange knowing looks. The lighting of courtship follows strict protocols. Too dim suggests impropriety, too bright discourages intimacy. The balance must be perfect. Mrs. Murray, as a widow who has navigated these waters alone, offers advice. 3 candles in the parlor, dear, placed where they light faces but not hands. And always have a servant tend them every quarter hour. It shows proper supervision while allowing conversation. This wisdom, passed from woman to woman, ensures that even romance operates within acceptable boundaries. The economic implications of their lighting choices extend beyond personal expense. These women's households employ dozens of servants whose primary duties involve maintaining illumination. Candle makers, merchants, and importers depend on their patronage. The entire colonial economy of light rests partly on their consumption patterns. They are, without acknowledging it, industrial powers in petticoats. A commotion outside briefly interrupts the gathering. Shouts from the street, the sound of breaking glass. The ladies pause, fans stilled, listening. But Margaret quickly signals for more candles to be lit, flooding the room with additional light as if brightness itself could hold disorder at bay. The common people grow restless these days, she observes calmly, and conversation resumes. This moment reveals the deeper meaning of elaborate illumination. Light represents order, civilization, the power to push back not just physical darkness but social chaos. These ladies, surrounded by their careful arrangements of candles, exist in an illuminated fortress against the uncertainties gathering outside their windows. The needlework continues as darkness fully claims the world beyond the parlor. Mrs. Winthrop completes a particularly difficult section of her tapestry, the success only possible because of the excellent light. She holds it up for admiration, and the other ladies examine it closely, their ability to appreciate the subtle gradations of color a mark of their refinement. Margaret reflects privately on the changes she's witnessed in Boston society. When she first married Thomas 20 years ago, even wealthy homes made do with rushlights and oil lamps for all but special occasions. Now, elaborate illumination is expected nightly. The acceleration of luxury troubles her sometimes, wondering where it will end. The servants' world, existing in parallel to this bright gathering, operates by different rules of light. In the kitchen, they make do with tallow candles and the glow from the cooking fires. In their quarters, rushlights or shared candles provide minimal illumination. The contrast between upstairs and downstairs is most stark in lighting. Those who maintain the bright world above live largely in darkness below. Sarah, the lady's maid, understands this contrast intimately. She spends her days ensuring perfect illumination for her mistress, while saving her pennies to afford a single candle for her own evening reading. The book she studies, hidden beneath her thin mattress, is a treatise on arithmetic. She dreams of someday managing her own shop, though such ambitions must remain secret. The children of the servants, if they're lucky enough to be allowed residence, grow up in shadows. They learn to move quietly through darkened halls, to complete their chores by touch and memory rather than sight. Occasionally, they glimpse the brilliant world above stairs, understanding from earliest youth the correlation between light and privilege. As 9 o'clock approaches, the gathering begins to wind down. The card games conclude with careful settling of accounts, IOUs written on finest paper and sealed with wax. The needlework is packed away in silk bags to protect it from dust and light between sessions. The ladies begin the elaborate process of departure, each exit time to reflect social standing. But before they leave, one final ritual must be observed, the exchange of recipes for candle preservation. Mrs. Hancock shares her method of storing spermaceti candles in lavender to prevent yellowing. Mrs. Murray recommends wrapping them in lamb's wool. These domestic secrets, traded like valuable commodities, represent the hidden knowledge that maintains their illuminated world. The political undertones of the afternoon cannot be entirely suppressed. As Mrs. Winthrop prepares to leave, she mentions casually that her husband has been discussing alternative suppliers for various household goods. Everyone understands this means boycotting British imports, though no one speaks it plainly. Even candlelight has become political, with choices about what to burn reflecting positions on colonial independence. Margaret walks her guests to the door, preceded by servants carrying branches of lit candles to illuminate their path to waiting carriages. This processional, purely ceremonial since the carriages have their own lanterns, demonstrates the hospitality of the house. Each departing guest takes with them the memory of perfect illumination, a standard against which their own efforts will be measured. Alone again in her parlour, Margaret surveys the scene. Candles still burn in the chandelier, their light now seeming excessive for a single occupant. She considers having them extinguished, but decides to enjoy a few minutes of solitary brilliance. She picks up her own needlework, abandoned when the guests arrived, and works by the generous light. Her husband Thomas enters, returning from his own evening at his club. He glances at the still burning candles with a slight frown. Was the gathering successful? He asks, understanding that these social events serve political purposes as important as any meeting. Margaret assures him it was, that the wives of important men left satisfied with their reception. The cost of the evening's illumination, nearly £3 worth of various candles, would appall Thomas if he knew the precise figure. But Margaret keeps these expenses buried in household accounts, understanding that the maintenance of their social position requires investments he might not approve if presented directly. The fiction that women don't understand money allows her to spend it more freely. As the candles are finally extinguished one by one, the parlor returns to darkness. The wallpaper birds disappear, the portraits fade into shadow, the crystal chandelier becomes merely a dark shape against the ceiling. The transformation is complete, from brilliant social stage to ordinary room. The magic that candlelight creates proves as temporary as the flames themselves. Yet tomorrow evening and the evening after, the ritual will repeat. Candles will be lit, society will gather, the elaborate dance of elite colonial life will continue. Each flame represents not just light but an entire social system, a way of life that depends on the labor of chandlers and wailers, servants and slaves, all to maintain these islands of illumination in the colonial darkness. The contrast with the candlemaker's workshop, where Thomas Whitmore and his apprentice labor in heat and stench to produce basic tallow candles, could not be more stark. Or with Paul Revere's careful crafting of silver candlesticks that will hold these expensive flames. Or with the sailors who risk their lives hunting whales for spermaceti. Each world depends on the others, yet they remain as separate as light from shadow. Margaret climbs the stairs to her bedchamber, carrying a single candle in a silver holder. This more modest illumination suits the private portions of the house. Even the wealthy economize where appearances don't matter. In her room, she'll read by this single flame before sleep, perhaps reviewing her accounts, calculating the social profit gained from today's expense. The house settles into darkness, punctuated only by the necessary candles that burn through the night. One in the nursery where the youngest child fears the dark. One in the front hall for security. One in the kitchen where the fire must be tended. These functional lights, without decoration or ceremony, maintain the household through the dark hours. In the morning, the cycle will begin again. Candles will be counted, wicks trimmed, holders polished. The apparatus of illumination requires constant maintenance, constant expense, constant attention. But for Boston's elite, the alternative, darkness, shadow, the inability to extend social life beyond daylight, is unthinkable. This is the paradox of colonial illumination. The wealthy burn in hours what workers earn in months, creating artificial day where nature intended night. They transform whale oil and beeswax into social capital, candlelight into political power. And in their bright parlors, insulated from the darkness that surrounds them, they plan the future of a nation that doesn't yet exist. The candlemaker, the silversmith, the whale oil processor, and the society lady, each plays their role in the colonial economy of light. Their stories, so different in detail, are bound together by the simple human desire to push back the darkness. Whether with tallow or spermaceti, in workshops or parlors, they all participate in the endless struggle between light and shadow that defines life in colonial Boston. As our journey through the candlelit world of colonial Boston draws to a close, let us pause for a moment in the pre-dawn darkness of a November morning in 1765. The city sleeps, wrapped in a blanket of shadow that seems absolute, yet in scattered windows across the town, small flames persist, the last candles of the night, burning down to their final inches. In Thomas Whitmore's chandlery on Fish Street, the banked fires glow faintly red through the furnace grates. In a few hours, Thomas will rise again, his hands still aching from yesterday's burns, to begin another day of transforming animal fat into light. Young Samuel sleeps fitfully above the workshop, his dreams filled with the endless rhythm of dipping, cooling, dipping again. The cats prowl through the darkness, hunting the rats that would otherwise devour the precious stores of tallow. Across town in North Square, Paul Revere lies beside his wife Sarah, his mind already turning to the day's work ahead. The Hutchinson tea service must be completed, the wedding rings delivered, the copper plate for the merchant's billhead collected. His tools wait in the darkness of his workshop, arranged precisely as he left them, ready for his skilled hands to transform raw metal into objects of beauty and utility. Down at the harbor, in the spermaceti processing facilities, the great vats sit cooling, their contents slowly crystallizing into the pure white wax that will illuminate Boston's finest homes. The smell of whale oil permeates the air, that strange mixture of the sea and industry that marks this district as surely as any sign. Ships rock gently at their moorings, some preparing to depart on voyages that will last years, hunting the great whales across all the world's oceans. And in the Georgian mansions of Beacon Hill, Margaret Hutchinson sleeps in her curtained bed, the events of yesterday's salon already fading into memory. The parlor below stands empty and dark, the chandelier's crystals invisible without light to animate them. Only the faintest smell of extinguished candles remains, a ghost of the afternoon's brilliance. These four worlds, the laborers, the craftsmen, the processors, and the consumers, seem separate, divided by walls of class and custom. Yet they are bound together by threads as delicate and essential as candlewick. Each depends upon the others, though they may never acknowledge it. The chandler cannot work without the renderer who supplies his tallow. The silversmith needs customers who can afford his candlesticks. The whale oil processor requires both hunters to supply raw materials and wealthy buyers to purchase the refined product. And the society lady's bright parlor depends on all of them. Consider how different this world is from our own, where light appears at the touch of a switch, where darkness has become almost optional. We have forgotten what it means to live by flame, to measure our days by the burning of wax and wick. The modern world has banished the darkness so thoroughly that we must seek it out, installing blackout curtains and sleep masks to find the shadow our ancestors couldn't escape. Yet something essential was present in that candlelit world that we have lost, an awareness of light's preciousness, an understanding of the labor required to push back the dark. When Thomas Whitmore produced a candle, he held in his hand hours of future light, carefully crafted and dearly bought. When Margaret Hutchinson lit her chandelier, she made a conscious choice to spend resources, to transform wealth into illumination. The candlemaker's apprentice, Samuel, learning his trade through burned fingers and aching arms, understood the value of light in ways we cannot. He knew its cost in sweat and pain, in pounds and pence, in the years of his youth spent breathing tallow fumes. Every candle he helped create represented not just a product but a piece of his life, transmuted into something that would briefly hold back the night. Paul Revere, crafting silver holders for these precious flames, created frames for light itself. His candlesticks would outlast the man who made them, the customers who bought them, the nation that was about to be born. Some of them survive still, in museums and private collections, waiting eternally for candles they will never again hold, monuments to a time when containing flame was an art requiring the finest metalwork. The whale oil that lit the 18th century came at a cost we can barely comprehend. Men spent years at sea, families were separated, sometimes forever. Ships were lost with all hands, crushed by storms or by the very creatures they hunted. The sperm whale, that magnificent beast whose head contained nature's finest illuminant, was hunted nearly to extinction. All for light, for the ability to extend human activity beyond sunset. And in her bright parlor, Margaret Hutchinson presided over a world made possible by all this labor and sacrifice. Though she might never acknowledge it, her refined gatherings, her careful conversations, her very ability to maintain her social position after dark, All depended on the chandler's craft, the silversmith's skill, the wailer's courage. The light that seemed to emanate naturally from her chandelier was actually the end point of a vast chain of human effort. This interconnection, this dependence of each class upon the others, would soon become one of the driving forces of the American Revolution. The Stamp Act that troubled their conversations, the trade restrictions that limited their commerce, affected chandler and society lady alike. In the taverns where Thomas Whitmore drank his evening ale, in the political clubs where Paul Revere gathered with fellow artisans, in the parlors where Margaret Hutchinson entertained, the same questions arose. Who should govern? Who should tax? Who should control the trade that brought light to colonial homes? Within a decade, these questions would explode into open rebellion. Paul Revere would make his famous ride, warning of British troops marching through the darkness. Thomas Whitmore's son would join the Continental Army, carrying candles in his pack that his father had made. Margaret Hutchinson would flee to England with her loyalist husband, leaving her brilliant parlour to be ransacked by angry mobs. The world of colonial candlemaking would be transformed by the revolution it helped to illuminate. But on this November night in 1765, all of that lies in an unknowable future. For now, there is only the quotidian struggle against darkness, the daily labor of creating and maintaining light. The candle maker will rise before dawn. The silversmith will work until his eyes strain. The whale ships will sail on dangerous seas. The society ladies will gather in bright parlors, each playing their part in the great drama of colonial illumination. As we prepare to leave this world behind, to return to our own age of electric abundance, perhaps we can carry with us some appreciation for what we have gained and lost. We have gained freedom from darkness, the ability to work and play at any hour, liberation from the tyranny of sunset. But we have lost the consciousness of light's value, the community bonds forged in shared darkness, the quiet rhythm of days that ended when flames guttered out. The candles of colonial Boston burned with more than just flame. They burned with human effort, with craft pride, with social meaning, with political possibility. Each small flame represented a victory over nature's darkness, achieved through knowledge passed down through generations, through skills learned despite burned fingers and aching backs, through courage to face the ocean's dangers, through wealth accumulated across decades of trade. Tonight, as you lie in your bed, surrounded by the ambient glow of electronic devices, the street lights filtering through your windows, the subtle illumination that never quite leaves the modern world, perhaps you might imagine yourself back in that darker time, when night meant true darkness, when a single candle was precious, when the labor of many hands was required to create even the smallest sphere of light. Think of Thomas Whitmore, finally allowing himself to rest after 14 hours of rendering and dipping, his workshop still reeking of tallow, his dreams haunted by the fear of fire. Think of young Samuel, flexing his burned fingers in the darkness, counting the years until his indenture ends. Think of Paul Revere, his steady hands shaping silver by candlelight, creating beauty that would outlast empires. Think of the unnamed whalers, somewhere in the vast Pacific, hunting giants by moonlight. And as sleep begins to claim you, as your own consciousness dims like a slowly extinguished candle, remember that you rest in comfort unimaginable to those who came before. Your room, even in darkness, is brighter than theirs ever were. Your air is cleaner, free from the smoke of tallow and whale oil. Your rest is untroubled by the fear that a knocked-over candle might consume everything you own. Yet in your comfort, perhaps spare a thought for those whose labor lit the past, the candle makers who turned fat to light, the metal workers who crafted holders for flame, the merchants who distributed these precious illuminants, the servers who trimmed wicks in the shadows while their betters played cards in the light. Each of them contributed to the slow victory over darkness that culminated in the electric world we inhabit. The story of colonial candlemaking is, in the end, a story about human ingenuity and perseverance, about the endless creativity we apply to fundamental problems, about the social structures we build around basic needs, about the inequalities that arise even in something as simple as access to light. It's a story that reminds us that our ancestors were not simple people living simple lives, but complex individuals navigating challenges we can barely imagine. So rest now in your electric abundance, your climate-controlled comfort, your freedom from the smoke and smell of burning fat. But remember, as you drift towards sleep, that every convenience you enjoy was built on the foundations laid by those who came before, who worked in darkness to create light, who sacrificed comfort for the possibility of progress, who lit their candles one at a time and pushed back the night inch by precious inch. The candles of colonial Boston have long since burned out. The tallow has been consumed, the wicks reduced to ash, the whale oil exhausted. But the light they represented, the human desire to extend our activities beyond what nature allows, to create spaces of warmth and illumination in a cold, dark world, that light continues, transformed into forms Thomas Whitmore could never have imagined. Good night, dear listener. May your rest be peaceful, your dreams untroubled by the smell of tallow or the fear of darkness. And may you wake tomorrow with perhaps a new appreciation for the simple miracle of light, that gift that our ancestors worked so hard to create and preserve, one candle at a time, one flame against the darkness, one small victory in humanity's eternal struggle to illuminate the night. Sleep well in the gentle glow of history's long shadow, where the candle makers of colonial Boston continue their patient work, forever dipping, forever burning, forever lighting the past that made our bright present possible.